this is an ugly incident. I mean, take us through what's been going on here and what do you make of it?
Yeah, it's definitely been a fast-moving situation since Lawrence Fox appeared on the Dan Wooten show last night and made those comments. So the channel condemned him. He was suspended. However, he refused to apologise for his comments. He doubled down on them in some respects, so he stood by what it was that he'd said. At the same time, Dan Wooten was apologising to Ava and saying he was sorry for the language used on the show and he didn't consider it appropriate. But this was somewhat undermined by Lawrence Fox's decision to share a screen grab of what appeared to be messages sent between Dan and Lawrence discussing his comments, in which Fox, or the first user, which we assume is Fox, was suggested that making the other individual giggle is their weekly joy, and the second person adding, you can imagine them freaking out in the gallery. So they were talking quite jovially, these individuals, about the incident, which somewhat undermined Dan Wooten's attempt to apologise, and so the channel then made the decision that he had to be removed as well. So that's where we are now.
Oh, so more than somewhat undermined, you'd have thought. And the channel, I think, has said there'd be an apology. Has the channel delivered an apology?
Not so far as I'm aware at the moment, or certainly not as far as Ava's made clear. She recorded a long podcast earlier today. She didn't seem to have received an apology at that stage. I think Dan Wooten had been trying to contact her, but she wasn't prepared to engage with him. So, yeah, she's still clearly very upset by the incident. And the other issue hanging over this is an Ofcom investigation and where that will lead and what that will find.
And where does that go now? How does that play out?
Well, currently Ofcom's assessing the complaints it's received about the incident. It will then decide whether or not it deems an investigation to be necessary. People I've been speaking to anticipate that it will need to investigate, and it is likely to find against the channel because language like that is not acceptable. That type of conversation is not acceptable under rules.
Yeah, and now there's a whole new controversy around this, which goes beyond the incident itself. It is I don't know, is it a symptom? Is it a mark of the state of the media now?
Well, we had Nick Robinson on Radio 4 earlier, and he was talking and saying that, you know, GB News, in some respects, it looks like a news channel, it sounds like a news channel, but it's pushing boundaries. It's not set up to be a rolling news channel in the way that the BBC and Sky are. And so, as its debate-led programming has almost outpaced the regulator's ability to govern it, and so it's been pushing at the lines, which is not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. We need innovation. You don't want a regulator to stifle, but you know, there's no doubt Ofcom has some decisions to make about how it finds against GB News and what the future of the channel might look like.
There's this curious situation where the channel argues that it's not actually a news channel and not subject to the strict confines of broadcasting rules as they apply to news channels, but it's called GB News.
Well, I think around some programming, it considers its output to be current affairs. And that's why they get away with that's why they're allowed, as it stands, to have politicians. There's Esther McVeigh and Phil, there's Jacob Rees-Mogg, they're serving Conservative politicians who, as it stands, are allowed to host shows, which has caused some consternation. And as it stands, that is legitimate because they are not presenting what is considered to be a straight news programme. They are presiding over debate, current affairs programmes. Now, this is something that's in motion at the moment, and Ofcom has undertaken a piece of work, is speaking to public to assess their views, and will have to make a decision at some point as to whether or not it's appropriate for politicians to present those kinds of programmes.